Hi, I'm Pete May, co-founder of GreenBiz Group, and I'm delighted to be here today with Aura Cuellar of Shell. Aura, great to have you on GreenBiz Studio today.
Pete, thank you for inviting me.
And I understand we were just talking, you are literally in a new role and almost literally in a new building and a new city. So give us some context on how you literally landed where you are.
Indeed. So I just had the great opportunity to come back to Houston. I have been the last 5 years in the Netherlands. It's my second time here in Houston. I'm grateful to be back. I'm taking on the role of VP of Energy Transition for the US. I'm really grateful and excited to be back.
That's great. So today we're going to talk about decarbonizing a very weighty subject, decarbonizing the U.S. And to do this, I know that I know, and some insiders may not, some folks may not know that Shell has done various scenarios in figuring out decarbonization and solving other thorny problems. So why don't, as we first start into that, and again, with you freshly back in the U.S., what's unique about the U.S. decarbonization journey versus other countries? And I think, Aura, as you explain that, it'll be interesting to talk about the Shell scenarios.
So maybe let's start with the Shell scenarios. In Shell, when we speak about the future, we use scenarios. Scenarios thinking is they are just a tool that helps us think of a possible outcome of the future. They help us think more broadly and think about the decisions that we're making today, how they can impact the future. So for Shell US, we have developed what we call the US scenario sketch. And this is a potential path for what it will take for the US to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. What we see in this sketch is that it is absolutely possible, economically and technically possible, to achieve net zero 50 emissions by 2050, but it will be challenging. And our hope is that this scenario will help shape the national conversation for the US in the energy transition space. What is unique about the US is really energizing. There are two pieces that are essential for us. And let me first reframe. I think the energy transition will be market-driven and innovation-led. And what is unique about us is that we have a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation that we can absolutely cultivate in order to develop technologies that are required for the energy transition. The second piece that is unique about the US is the vast amount of natural resources that we have. And by that, I mean land for biofuels, solar power, wind, and natural gas, and our excellent geological structures that allow us to store CO2 underground.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's maybe a good segue. Why don't you talk a little bit about trying to get as specific as you can. What are some specific areas for the U.S. that we need to approach in the next 30 years to decarbonize?
So in that scenario, what we see for the energy system in the U.S. in the next 30 years is certainly a significant change on what that final outcome would look like in order for us to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Some of those specific switches or changes that will happen is we see that 85% of the power generation will come from renewable sources. That includes solar, where we believe by the mid-30s, 2030s, we will see a significant part from solar, and also wind, of course, will play a role in there. We also believe that there will be a longer deployment of hydrogen and continued development of biofuels and just different energy, a different spectrum of energy sources. So those are some of the specific things that we see changing in the next 30 years.
Yeah, interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about policy and maybe from a public point of view, what action needed. We're in an interesting time this week. Lots going on in terms of policy in DC. But specifically, what policy support or action do you think is needed for the U.S. to achieve net zero by 2050?
So we believe at Shell that effective policy is essential for us to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And we need policy at a city level, at a state level, at a federal level. So let me speak perhaps about three policies that we believe are really important. Let's start with carbon pricing. So we believe carbon pricing is essential to help the development of technology and development of low carbon solutions. There's many different frameworks that can be used for carbon pricing, but at the end, carbon pricing is going to help us reallocate capital in the market to help the advantage of the new clean technologies. It would also help customers make low carbon choices. So carbon prices is one of those key policies. A second policy that is really important has to do with infrastructure, which, as you mentioned, is absolutely relevant to our country right now. The reason why infrastructure policy is essential is we need a robust system through our country in order to be able to deploy new technologies at a scale. So that infrastructure improvements can be in the EV charging space or in power space, different ones.
Interesting. Yeah, that's again very very topical as the infrastructure bill right now is being made at this very moment. Yeah. So and tell us, elaborate a little bit on what are some of the pieces of infrastructure you mentioned? EV charging. What else?
Again, when we look at our scenario and when we look at what the energy system would look like for the US in 2050, we see that the energy demand in 30 years from now, 60% will need electrification, for example. Therefore, it is essential that we from now start looking at what does it take in order for us to have the right infrastructure system in place to enable that essential source or part of our energy system.
And so the last question really is, what is Shell's role in helping the U.S. to decarbonize?
Absolutely. Shell's purpose as a company is to power progress together with more and cleaner energy solutions. That's why I think it makes sense that our strategy is called Powering Progress. So Shell is committed to be an integral player achieving net zero goals by 2050. And we are doing so already in multiple ways. That includes development of EV charging, that includes deploying hydrogen refueling infrastructure, that includes expanding our renewable power business, and for example, supplying sustainable aviation fuel to customers like Amazon Air and KLM. Shell is committed to powering progress, and we will continue to collaborate with industry, with governments, and with society at large to achieve net zero emissions by 2050.
Great. Well, we do a lot of these Green Biz Studios. I can't think of one I've done where, the ambition and the work necessary for the next 30 years to decarbon the U.S. is as great as the challenge that we face on that. So, wish you luck, and just now that you've just literally landed into the new role. But Aura Cuellar, Shell VP of Energy Transition, great to have you on Green Biz Studio today.
Pete, thank you for having me.